LangGraph implements dynamic execution control through interrupt-driven state persistence, enabling human-in-the-loop validation workflows where graph execution pauses at arbitrary points to await external input before resuming with updated context. This mechanism leverages checkpointing via SqliteSaver to maintain thread-specific state across suspension resumption cycles, with interrupt payloads surfacing in the interrupt field for caller inspection. We'll examine how a form validation pipeline initializes with a state graph, containing a single validation node that conditionally triggers interrupts, using a persistent SqLite checkpointer to manage thread state across multiple invocation resume cycles. The implementation demonstrates input validation through iterative prompting, where invalid responses trigger reprompts while valid data updates the state and completes the workflow. Import SqLite 3. From typing import typed dict. From LangGraph, checkpoint, SqLite import SqliteSaver. From LangGraph, graph import state graph start end. From LangGraph, types import command interrupt. Class form state type dict. Age int none. Def get age node state, form state. Prompt equals what is your age? While true. Answer equals interrupt prompt hash, payload surfaces in result interrupt. If is instancing swar, int and answer 0. Return age, answer. Prompt equals f, answer, is not a valid age. Please enter a positive number. Builder equals state graph form state. Builder, add node collect age, get age node. Builder add edge start, collect age. Builder, add edge collect age, end. Checkpointer equals SqliteSaver SqliteSaver 3, connect forms, db. Graph equals builder, compile checkpointer equals checkpointer. Config, configurable, threaded, form 1. First equals graph, invoke age. None config equals config. Print first interrupt, hash interrupt value equals what is your age. Hash provide invalid data, the node reprompts. Retry equals graph, invoke command resume equals 30, config equals config. Print retrieve, interrupt, hash interrupt value equals 30 is not a valid age. Hash provide valid data, loop exits and state updates. Final equals graph, invoke command resume equals 30, config equals config. Print final age, hash 30. This code demonstrates a human-in-the-loop form validation workflow using LangGraph's interrupt mechanism. The pattern creates a persistent conversation thread where the system pauses execution to request and validate user input, maintaining state between interactions through checkpointing. The implementation uses a state graph with a single node that contains a validation loop. The interrupt function pauses execution and returns a prompt to the caller, with the payload surfacing in the interrupt field. When the user provides input via command resume equals, the node restarts from the beginning, revalidates the input, and either reprompts for invalid data or updates the state for valid input. The SqliteSaver checkpointer persists the graph state between invocations, with the threaded in the config acting as a persistent cursor to maintain continuity across multiple interactions. This approach enables robust input validation while keeping the conversation stateful. The trade-off is that the entire node re-executes on resume, requiring validation logic to be idempotent. The pattern is particularly useful for form-like interactions where you need to collect and validate structured data from users through multiple turns, with the checkpointing ensuring the conversation can be resumed even after application restarts. Let's break it down. Import SqLite 3. Imports SqLite 3, Python's built-in library for interacting with SqLite databases. From typing import typed dict. Imports typed dict from the typing module, which enables creating dictionary types with specific key value type annotations for type checking and code clarity. From LangGraph, checkpoint, SQLite import SqliteSaver.
Imports the SqliteSaver class from LangGraph's checkpoint module, which provides SQLite-based persistence for saving and restoring graph execution states during interrupts.
From LangGraph, graph import stateGraph start end.
Import stateGraph, start, and end from the LangGraph graph module, providing the core components for defining graph-based workflows with explicit start and end nodes.
From LangGraph, types import command interrupt.
Imports the command, class, and interrupt function from LangGraph's types module, providing tools to pause graph execution and resume it with external input.
Class form state type dict.
Defines a form state class that inherits from type dict, creating a type-hinted dictionary structure for representing form state data with explicit key value type expectations. This establishes a schema for form-related data that will be used elsewhere in the code base, ensuring type safety and clarity when working with form state objects. The typeDict base class provides static type checking for dictionary-like objects, helping catch potential errors during development.
Def getAgeNodeState, form state.
Defines a function named getAgeNode that accepts a single parameter, state of type form state. The function signature indicates this is likely a node in a LangGraph workflow that processes form state data, though the actual implementation isn't visible in this segment.
Prompt equals, what is your age?
Assigns a string value, what is your age, to a variable named prompt. This creates a simple text prompt that could be used later in the code, likely for displaying to a user or passing to a function that handles user interaction. The variable now holds this specific question as its value.
Answer equals interrupt prompt hash, payload surfaces in result interrupt.
Calls the interrupt function with the prompt value, which pauses graph execution and surfaces the payload in the result under the interrupt key. The graph state is saved, and execution waits for external input to resume.
If instancienswar, int and answer 0.
Checks if the variable answer is an integer and greater than 0. This conditional evaluates to true only when both conditions are met. The type of answer is int, and its value is positive.
Return age, answer.
Returns a dictionary with a single key, age, mapped to the value of the variable answer. This is a standard Python dictionary return, where the dictionary is constructed inline with the key value pair. The line itself doesn't indicate any special handling or framework-specific behavior. It's a straightforward return of a dictionary containing the age data.
Prompt equals f answer is not a valid age. Please enter a positive number.
Creates an error message string that formats the invalid user input, answer, into a prompt, indicating the input is not a valid age and instructing the user to enter a positive number instead. The message uses f-string interpolation to dynamically insert the invalid value into the feedback.
Builder equals stateGraph form state.
Creates a stateGraph instance using form state as the state type. This initializes a graph builder that will manage state transitions and execution flow for a form processing workflow.
Builder, add node collect age, getAgeNode.
Adds a node named collectAge to the graph builder, associating it with the getAgeNode function. This node will execute the getAgeNode logic when reached during graph traversal.
Builder at edge start, collect age.
Adds a directed edge from the start node to the collectAge node in the graph being constructed by the builder. This establishes that execution should transition from the starting point to the age collection step.
Builder, add edge collect age, end.
Adds a directed edge from the collect age node to the end node in the graph, establishing that after the collect age node completes execution, the graph workflow should terminate. This creates a direct transition path that concludes the graph's execution flow at this point.
Checkpointer equals SqliteSaver SqliteSaver 3. Connect forms, db.
Creates a SqliteSaver instance named checkpointer that connects to a SQLite database file named forms.db. The instance is initialized with an active database connection, which will be used to persist graph execution states for interrupt handling.
Graph equals builder. Compile checkpointer equals checkpointer.
Compiles the graph builder with checkpointing enabled, using the provided checkpointer instance to persist and restore execution state. This allows the graph to save its state at interrupt points and resume later from the same checkpoint. The resulting compiled graph will use the checkpointer to manage thread-specific execution states, enabling pause-resume functionality through interrupts.
Config, configurable, threaded, form 1.
Creates a configuration dictionary with a configurable key that contains a threaded set to form 1. This configuration specifies which thread state to load or resume in LangGraph's interrupt system, effectively acting as a persistent cursor for checkpointing and resuming execution.
First equals graph, invoke age. None config equals config. Print first interrupt. Hash interrupt_value equals what is your age.
Invokes the graph with an input containing a null age value and a configuration object, then prints the interrupt payload from the response. The interrupt field contains an interrupt object with the message, "What is your age?" indicating the graph execution, pause to request external input.
Retry equals graph. Invoke command resume equals 30. Config equals config.
Invokes the graph with a command containing a resume value of 30 and passes the provided configuration. This resumes a previously interrupted graph execution, supplying 30 as the external input to continue processing from where it was paused. The config parameter ensures the operation uses the specified thread context and settings.
Print retrieve interrupt. Hash interrupt_value equals 30 is not a valid age.
Prints the value stored in the interrupt key of the retry dictionary, which contains an interrupt object with a message indicating that 30 is not a valid age. This demonstrates accessing the interrupt payload that was generated when execution was paused, showing the specific validation error that triggered the interruption.
Final equals graph. Invoke command resume equals 30. Config equals config.
Invokes the graph execution with a resume command that provides the value 30, using the specified configuration. This resumes a previously interrupted graph execution at the point where it was paused, passing 30 as the resume value to the interrupt call. The config parameter determines which persistent thread state to resume, as defined by its threaded.
Print final age, hash 30.
Prints the value associated with the key age from the dictionary, final, which outputs 30 as indicated by the comment. This implementation showcases LangGraph's interrupt-driven workflow pattern, where execution pauses at arbitrary points to await external input while maintaining state through checkpointing. The core mechanism revolves around the interrupt function, which surfaces prompts in the interrupt field and saves the graph state via SqliteSaver. The threaded acts as a persistent cursor, allowing the workflow to resume exactly where it left off across multiple invocations. The validation loop in getAgeNode demonstrates how interrupts enable iterative human-in-the-loop validation. Each invalid input triggers a reprompt through another interrupt, while valid data updates the state and completes the workflow. The trade-off here is that the entire node re-executes on resume, requiring idempotent validation logic. This pattern is particularly effective for form-like interactions, where structured data needs to be collected and validated across multiple turns, with checkpointing ensuring conversation continuity even after application restarts.
The checkpoint cradles the interrupt S-whisper, only to forget it when the answer arrives.